to be given much more importance than we have been doing so far. At Rio Plus 20, we know that many partners are trying to do it from the business sector, from governments. We're trying to do from our side also, even as a UN, by showcasing how the UN buildings can become more sustainable from a resource efficiency perspective, starting by energy. We're trying to showcase all this at Rio, trying to see how we can move further. But we want to move from just policy. We want to come with real cases, demonstrate, replicate, scale up, and speed up. So the building sector, from an overall perspective of sustainable consumption and production, has an important role step by step throughout the systemic analysis. But it requires a multi-stakeholder approach. No one actor can deal with the building alone. This is impossible, and this is even a mistake, because it creates over-expectation that cannot be delivered. But of course, buildings have to be put in their context of cities, and we know very well, and we do have excellent cases that by working on sustainable building and a proper land use planning and an urban planning, you can respond to the need for houses, hospitals, schools, universities, and all this will contribute, of course, to the poverty issues. Now, there are challenges. It's very easy to say, all what I have said, anyone can tell me, and then what? Why we are not doing it? There are series of development challenges. The building sector from an informal perspective is enormous, very difficult to control. You see it in all the big cities. And then we have to consider the access to electricity, waste, water, and so on afterwards. The energy and environmental challenges are increasing. How can we really manage the energy use and its emission? And how can we have a sector that is more resource efficient in terms of consumption? But we don't have the right knowledge when it comes to data. We don't have the proper elements to measure what's happening in the building sector. And this is our limitation. That's why in the beginning, I gave you magnitude, 70, 80, 90, and so on. We know the magnitude, but we don't have the right figure that allow us to go to a banking system and do it properly in order to understand better the impacts today. But we all know that there are a lot of opportunities, demonstrated, a lot of pilot projects scaled up in certain number of countries and regions that can be replicated from one region to another. There was this false idea that if you work on sustainable building, it will cost you much more. Maybe it happened in 1, 2, 3 type of buildings. But generally speaking, it's a limited amount, can be paid back rather quickly, and we're talking about an average from 3 to 7 years, so average 5 years, as we say. In some cases, it's even, I would say, negative. You just get your benefits on the spot, and there are excellent cases for that. We will have to see how we can adapt our standard of living, our way of living, our concept of comfort with the building, with the house in which we live. What can we drop and improve in order to improve resource efficiency? Why should we all having so many lights around? How can we redesign the building that does not require so much air conditioning or heater and so on? We know how to do it. We are not doing it, except in few cases. We have heard yesterday that you have 5 buildings in a country that have got the certificate, 10 buildings in another one, 15 buildings in another. What does it mean for a city? What does it mean for the country? It just shows that we know how to do it. But now we need to replicate. Why are we not scaling up, replicating, speeding up? And there are the limiting factors that the minister is neglecting, the mayor is neglecting, the engineer is neglecting, the consumer is neglecting. Each one is thinking in its Eiffel Tower without considering the others because they don't want to share responsibility. And this is the big problem of buildings. The benefits in those cases have been demonstrated. I will not get into the details. in energy, in infrastructure, in water, in waste and material. You have excellent cases, and I will tell you, the best cases are not necessarily in OECD countries. The best cases are not necessarily, without any criticism, in USA or in France. You can find excellent cases in Burkina Faso, in Tanzania, and in Vietnam. And we probably need to learn from those cases who are still considering how our grandfathers used to live without considering its sustainability, but they were living in line with what we call sustainable today. So coming back to why we're talking about buildings, I referred to this yesterday. It's unfortunate, but it's thanks to the financial crisis and the stimulus packages that we have been talking about buildings. If my information is right, Mexico is one of the countries that put highest importance on buildings in its stimulus package. Since then, what has been done? I would very much appreciate if somebody can tell me what has been done from this stimulus package focusing on building. Yes, we have seen yesterday the cases for housing and so on. Excellent case, fantastic, to be replicated elsewhere. We're trying from our side in UNEP to do something similar that we call SUSHI, Sustainable Urban Housing, and we're implementing it in Sao Paulo, in Bangkok. We'll try to do it actually in Bangladesh and in India. But as I said, in the buildings, 10 cases, 5 cases, 20 cases, we will have a couple of cases. So we have all demonstrated that it can be done. It is feasible. What are the constraints that on the process? Because this is not an action. This is not a one action. It is a process that involves many and that involves trade-offs. And people are not ready for trade-offs for selfishness or for political reasons or for business reasons. So we need to address this tremendous potential that we have in the building sector. And in this sector, more than in others, you have two sectors, buildings and procurement, where the government has the highest responsibility and where they can make a difference. Simply because when considering the number of buildings that are owned by a state or by a city and the purchasing power they have. In some countries, we're talking about 30% of the capacity of the buildings when it comes to schools, universities, public building administrations, and so on. Can you imagine the impact if a government today decides that in 5 years, all the public buildings will become sustainable, will become passive houses, will become and so on. The private sector, by obligation, in order to preserve their interests, they will adapt their production of the material. They will ensure that in order to respond to 1/3 of the market, it's better for them to be competitive and to respond to that. But we don't have that type of policies. We're trying to do actually on sustainable procurement around the world. So we need to change, we need to take action, and government has responsibility. Now, what are the barriers? You all know them, but we don't give them the importance because it's complicated. And something that is complex and complicated, we tend to put it aside. We go to the easy one. There are, in the building sector, it's rather small opportunities rather than big, well-concentrated opportunities. There is an economic disconnect between the person who will build the building and the one who will live in it, who will invest and who will get the benefits. There is lack of capacity to realize really the opportunities of CO2 emission, of energy efficiency, the economic gains. We don't have the right information, because if we had it, nobody, would be stupid enough to say, wait, I can save so much, why I'm not doing it? But then, of course, in order to be able to do that, he might need some market instruments that probably we don't have. And this brings us to the second part. We need policies, tools, and incentives to retrofit existing buildings, but also looking at new buildings. But also here we have a fragmentation And the importance of the informal sector is preventing this type of work. The incentives, we don't have incentives for the building sector. You have incentives to change your windows. You have incentives to use this material. You have incentives for this one or for the other. We don't have a comprehensive, holistic approach for building incentives. Can we do it? I don't know. But we have to be aware of this limitation in order to be able to move on. We don't have the common definitions. How to measure, what are the standards? We have heard about the standards, the certification system, the US one, the French one, and which one do you need in your country to be able to move? Should you all have this high-level, big standard certification system that are done in the US that are only implemented, for example, in Mexico or in Peru and others by the multinational companies? Or should you look at a standard certification system that is for the common houses? And what type of certification? At which level do you start in order to move step by step? It cannot be done just overnight. We don't have the political willingness and the leadership. As I said, we don't have the government taking the lead. And despite a lot of policies that we have, and Mexico, as I said yesterday when Cesar was presenting tenemos, you go to China. I'm following very closely China because that's where we can make a difference in the world. They have all the legislation you want, and they can work on command and control that other countries can do. Still, it's difficult because they don't have the right connection with the market. And the methodology for carbon trading when it comes now to the climate change issue. Now, where are we? We know that we can have low carbon buildings. We know that we can have passive buildings, but we are not replicating them. We are not scaling it up. So still a lot. We are still at the university level, where we are preparing a PhD with cases demonstrating it. And usually, from a good research at university, you need 20 years before implementing that. The problem that we don't have this luxury of waiting 10 and 20 years. Because the building sector, something is done wrong in the beginning, it's here for the next 50 years. By the time you retrofit and so on, it's never the same. So there are a combination of factors that are unfortunately slowing down the process. Systemic and systematic ones. The remedies cannot be on level, it's global because of the material, because of CO2 emissions. The policy intervention, as I said, has proven to be the most effective one, but you need a very courageous government to be able to move on that. There are in the world. I hope you can have one here. And the implementation requires serious political commitment from a minister, from a government, from a mayor, from the companies, and from a citizen who will be living there. But this requires really long-term perspective. More than any other sector, the building sector and the cities planning require long-term planning, long-term perspective. In developed economies, what they say developed economies, most of the buildings are there. They will be just building some few ones, 5%, 10%. In Mexico, in Colombia, in Peru, in Africa, most of the buildings are to come because of growth of population, because of improvement standard of living, and so on. So we have a fantastic opportunity. A new representative of the Green Building Council of Latin America and Americas. You have a fantastic opportunity to do things right from the beginning, but not with 10 cases and 20 cases. Be much more ambitious and try to see what are the solutions to be ambitious in that sense.